Hey guys, it's Mike back here in the Nerd Cave, and this past weekend I was up visiting my girlfriend's family and I wanted to try something out while we were up there. I wanted to see how well a 7-year-old iPad Air Gen 1 could perform as my mobile kind of work platform. Needed to be able to get some entertainment, YouTube, Netflix, things like that in, as well as some email, web browsing, and maybe even a little productivity, mainly video editing. There's some decent software and hardware married together here in these Apple devices, and I know there's some decent video editing software as well. So I wanted to give that a try, and if this 7-year-old device can do it, any newer one should be able to as well. So let's see how that went. Before we really get into it, I wanted to get this out of the way right away. This wouldn't be my first choice, or even my second or third probably, for a permanent mobile solution. It just doesn't have the full features that I would want out of a mobile work station, mobile work PC, whatever you want to call it. This is very outdated spec-wise, especially when it comes to the storage and RAM specifically. It only had 16 gigs of storage and 1 gigabyte of RAM. You really notice those two things, especially if you're trying to be productive on it. With that said though, this thing really exceeded my expectations. So without further ado, let's get into how this thing did work for me. Oh, actually, one more thing. This Air Gen 1 only goes up to iOS 12.4. It stopped getting support after that. Yeah, if you want to install any newer apps or apps that require like iOS 13 or iPad OS, you wouldn't be able to on this specific device. Now that we have those few things out of the way, for the most part, I use this for emails, YouTube, listening to some music, and passing the time. What I noticed while doing those things, it did slow down if you had like more than one thing happening at all. You really couldn't have 2 apps or 3 apps open. You tried to switch between them, they'd have to fully reload. If you had a couple tabs open on Chrome, they would have to refresh every time you switched back to them, and that was all probably the 1 gig of RAM. It's just really hindered. Besides that, there's not a lot that you do on this machine that really tells me that it's an old machine. Especially the screen on this thing. It's a resolution of 2048 by 1536. That's a pixel density of 264 pixels per inch on a 9.7 inch screen. Same exact retina resolution that they use on the regular iPad today. So that by no means held it back. But the 1 gig of RAM and being on iOS 12.4 did hold it back. Overall, the weekend, when it came to web browsing, YouTube, anything entertainment related, this iPad really performed well. How about productivity specifically? The biggest thing I wanted to figure out this weekend was how well this could perform when editing video. More or less, I just wanted to see if this thing could handle video editing at all, because if this could do it, a much newer iPad could definitely do it. And I specifically wanted to use the app LumaFusion, as I've heard nothing but good things about how that is the app to be using if you're trying to edit on an iPad. So I paid the $30, got LumaFusion, and it went pretty well. I'm happy to say that the app itself is pretty beginner friendly. It's really easy to pick up right away. Everything kind of makes sense if you've edited on any other software, but even if you hadn't, there's a helpful little like cog down in the bottom corner. You can hold down that and it'll show you what everything does. But really, jumping between editing an individual clip, color grading, cutting clips together, adding music, anything like that, it was all really smooth. It was also pretty impressive how well you could just scrub through the timeline and it didn't slow down. There was no hiccups. blew my mind really when comparing it to a video software on Mac or PC. Like, how can this handle it so well? It was really cool to see. Even with like color grades and stuff over top, it would still scrub through without a problem. There was an issue I had at first, with it being an older iPad. I couldn't put any footage that was more than 1080p 30 FPS on here. I tried to do 1080p 60 at first. Luckily it was just some footage I had gotten at home that I wanted to throw on here and practice with. That didn't work out, so I was actually able to throw a quick little clip together before I left, just so I'd have some footage to practice on that was 1080p or 720p 60. And this is actually what I came up with. It was just like a little video, me pouring a drink and sitting down for the night before we were leaving. Here it is. It was only a 28-second clip, so it's not that impressive, and I'm also not an advanced editor in any way. I'm still just learning across the board. But it was still cool when it comes to my standards, and awesome to just see that this software was this useful and this easy to work with. The rest of the weekend I was able to use it to throw together a video for my girlfriend's little sister's graduation parade, and I have to say that went really well. Got some really cool footage, even in a longer video length. Had no problem scrubbing through the timeline, rendering it, all of that. It only crashed once, but since LumaFusion autosaves, popped it right back open, everything was where I'd left off. It was a really good experience. Oh, one more thing with all of this. By the end of the weekend, I hadn't charged it once, and it had gone from 100% battery to 26% battery. That's pretty good. It's an older device, so it's definitely degraded a little bit, but I wouldn't say I've ever used it a ton, so it's still probably pretty good when it comes to its battery health. But yeah, that was mind-blowing as well. This experiment was definitely a success. I now have a pretty tough decision ahead of me. I had my eye on a specific couple laptops that I was thinking about getting for editing on the go, but now I might have to say that the iPad Pro is in that mix. It's right around that price range if I want to get the pencil and the keyboard, and it was surprisingly really good. I would have never thought a few years ago that I would say, hey, maybe I'll get an iPad as a computer, but it's definitely in the running now. That's all for today's video, guys, but subscribe, stick around for the next one. I've got a pretty cool laptop review actually. My buddy needed a new laptop, so I picked one out for him. Keep your eyes open for that, and I'll see you in the next one.